So former British Chancellor Rishi Sunak and former Prime Minister Boris Johnson are hoping to become Britain's next Prime Minister, taking over from Liz Truss, who resigned around this time yesterday. Let's talk about this now with Noel Ferguson, Executive Director and Dean at the World Leadership Institute and Centre for Positive Value Leadership. A very good afternoon to you, sir. Grateful for your time. Liz Truss out after just a month and a bit in the post. Is the UK better for it?
Oh, I don't know. But what I do know is that we shouldn't call the programme daytime update. It should really now be daily update, because things have changed so quickly in the UK, literally on an hour-by-hour basis in the past 72 hours. Is the UK better? Oh, I don't know. I kind of predicted 6 weeks ago that Liz Truss was not to be the person for the job. And will we be better off? Well, it all depends who is elected next week.
Right.
And as we've already kind of mentioned, Boris Johnson is now one of the forerunners.
How do we explain that, the appeal? I mean, I was reading now, even the Defence Minister, Ben Wallace, now in the last few moments saying he would support, actually, at this point, a return of Boris Johnson. But you have to wonder why when you consider the circumstances around his departure a few months ago.
Well, this is the interesting thing, because his choice of strategy and his mandate seemed to be reasonable. It was the way he was behaving regarding the rules and regulations which were applied to COVID in the UK, which himself and his colleagues seemed to disregard, even though ordinary citizens had to adhere to them. So he could come back and say, you know, I've learned from all of that, I paid my penance. While it was only 5 weeks, it's not my fault that Liz Truss was, you know, so poor in the role. Interestingly, he's been very quiet during the duration of Liz Truss's premiership. So he's kept his nose clean, we could say, over the past 5 weeks. Is the odds-on favourite? Oh, well, the fact the Defence Secretary has come out in his favour could swing it in his way.
And why is the Conservative Party, Liz Truss political party, which will ultimately select a Prime Minister by this time next week, why are they not so keen on Rishi Sunak? Because he was the former Chancellor of Exchequer, the Finance Minister, basically, in the UK, ran against Liz Truss and lost. And now it appears, even at this early stage, that even if he were to go head-to-head with Boris Johnson, he wouldn't win.
Well, this is the thing. When Rishi Sunak was the Chancellor in the early days, he got on very well with Boris Johnson. Over time, however, there seemed to be a distance that grew between them. And that was probably due to Boris Johnson's aspirations to deliver his mandate, and Rishi Sunak saying, look, we can't afford this at the moment. So in some ways, he kind of he disavowed himself from the majority of the Conservative Party because of that kind of mini conflict. He probably could be the second runner now, but we'll just have to wait and see what happens next week.
Why not go to a general election?
Why don't we go to a general election? Well, this is the thing. Whenever we're saying about appointing a new Prime Minister next week, they're all as bad as each other in reality. There seems to be very few politicians with leadership capability. And there was one of the Conservative MPs came out last night and said, look, I've had enough of all of these talentless people. So even within the rank and file, they're admitting that they haven't got true leaders or orators who can actually stand up and not just have an idea, but convince the population that it's the right pathway to go down. And that was the fault of Liz Truss. She just came in and just went, right, we're doing this. I'm not telling you why. I'll tell you in 3 months' time when the Office of Budget Responsibility can explain it then. So it's an interesting situation.
I wonder, though, Noel, if the governing Conservative Party is not hoping by delaying a general election, let's say this year or next year, it would be able to put in place a Prime Minister who would save it from definite electoral defeat at the ballot.
Yep. It could be saving from defeat or saving from even a coalition government. They've made such a mess, and no matter when the general election is, Starmer and the Labour Party can turn around and say, look, they brought the entire country down in the space of 5 weeks. Can you really trust them, you know, to have responsibility for the UK again? So he will always have that in his back pocket, his trump card to play. They won't go to a general election now. They're bound to lose it, despite the cries from Labour and the SNP to have a general election, which would be the right thing to do. But unfortunately, they are in power and can decide when they choose to have the general election. One of the benefits or disadvantages of the parliamentary system.
However long they delay, though, the path to a general election, and they do indeed select a new Prime Minister in a week's time, will the British public, you think, ultimately still punish the Conservatives at the ballot when that election rolls round?
I think they will do, because whenever the Conservatives won the red brick vote in the north of the country, that was a huge success for them at the last general election. Well, now they have demonstrated that they were going to lower taxes for the higher paid, they were going to maintain the tax levels for the lower paid. So Liz Truss has done everything that they pledged they would not do at the last election. People have long memories, and some people have short careers, especially if you're Liz Truss.
And how do they begin to make right? I know Jeremy Hunt, the new finance minister who replaced Kwasi Kwarteng, has reversed almost all of Liz Truss' budget, which sparked this political turmoil, right? And among the issues that have been reversed is that cap on energy prices, which they were hoping to do for 2 years. Well, Jeremy Hunt simply said that's not feasible. Let's do it in 6 months and review in April. And then you see these absolutely devastating reports coming out of the UK, elderly people saying, at this rate, given the current prices, they are likely to freeze to death and they have no food in their homes. So what about the poor while all of this is going on?
Well, this is an interesting aspect again, because Boris Johnson, prior to him being fired as Prime Minister, had said, we can look after the elderly people because I made all buses free. So if they want, they can sit on the bus and get the heat from the bus or go to the library or a government building. That's unrealistic. People will likely remember that when it comes to Boris Johnson. But again, the downside is it's the parliamentary party which will elect the new Prime Minister. It's not the general public. And it's almost like somebody getting membership of an exclusive club and they have the availability to vote. So people will not be happy no matter what happens next week. The Conservatives may be, but the general population will still have many questions in mind.
And how democratic is that for a country that prides itself in being a democracy?
Well, this is the thing. Democratically, we appoint our MPs. Now, there is some dispute to say, well, at the last election, Boris Johnson was the Prime Minister. He had the mandate. Well, actually, no, that's not entirely true, because the Prime Minister can change at any time. You give the mandate to the government, and the government decides who the leader will be. So the Labour Party is kind of playing with words, saying, Liz Truss didn't have a mandate. The next PM won't have a mandate. But if Boris Johnson gets back in, then he could rightly argue, well, I did have the mandate, so I'm just going to continue on what I started 3 years ago. So there could be some advantages to putting Boris Johnson back in to quell that kind of argument from Labour.
Noel Ferguson, Executive Director and Dean at the World Leadership Institute and Centre for Positive Value Leadership. A pleasure to speak to you, sir. Thank you.